Welcome to this news briefing from ACS's 206th National Meeting and Exposition in Boston. We're joined today by Dr. Cordelia Running from Purdue University. She's studying how saliva could influence taste preferences. Dr. Running?
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Dr. Cassidy. So I'm really excited to be able to share a little bit of our work that we've been doing at Purdue University. All of this is coming out of a master's students project who just finished up, so she's very excited to have the data get some attention. You can go ahead and show the next slide. All of this sort of centers around this idea that we've known for decades that saliva can influence flavor perceptions that people experience. So the stuff that's in your spit can actually bind onto different flavor compounds, change the way you experience them, and make your experience of food and reality different from the person sitting next to you. And we've known also for a very long time that those flavors that you experience can then change what diets you select. You know, people generally do not stick to diets that they really hate, and having a diet that you enjoy might, be something that you can maintain over the long run. But those aren't always necessarily the kinds of diets we would really like people to stick to. I am in a nutrition science department. We would like people to have better nutrition and better health. So, it doesn't always work out that those flavors you seek out are the things that we want you to eat. So we're exploring sort of this next aspect of this relationship between saliva and flavor and diets, and looking into whether your diet itself can change your saliva in ways that change the flavors that you experience. So it's kind of this full circle hypothesis that we have going on. So some work from a friend of mine, Anne-Marie Torregrossa, who's at SUNY Buffalo, has done this in rodents, showing that the animals will actually change the way they experience flavors based on the diets that they have been fed. And we're trying to expand this into humans. And our research is showing this, that we can feed people stuff like the really bitter compounds that you find in chocolate, the really dark chocolate, the stuff that's good for you. And that can actually change the stuff that's in your saliva that influences the way you experience flavors. And so we're really excited to see this come out. We're really excited to start to see some of these relationships. It still has a long way to go to figure out whether this is actually a good thing or a bad thing, and how it might influence health, and lots of other questions. But it certainly is really fun to get it started. So.
Okay. Are there any questions? Please state your name and affiliation before asking your question. Yes, Bela.
Bela Buslig, ACS. I would have suspected that, of course, saliva has a lot to do with flavor and taste and so forth. Was there any kind of or are you aware of any kind of a research that's done of the sequence of foods that you're eating? And like when you go to dinner, you don't just eat one thing. At least most people don't. Mm-hmm. An optimal way of let's say you want to finish up with a steak. What would you want to eat first, rather than just take the whole through and try stuff? Mm-hmm. Is there something of this? Obviously, if you prime your salivary system to produce a certain kind of protein for one particular thing that you ate as an appetizer, well, you might be more likely to favor something else for the second course or the third course or whatever you want to do. So it sounds like a really fascinating research, but I'd just like to have a...
Yeah, so absolutely there are orders that you can make effects out of in the way that your saliva is responding to your food. One of the flavors that we're interested in is astringency, so it's sort of the dry, rough feeling you get in your mouth from things like green teas and certain types of chocolate and the really big red wines, that cause that rough feeling in your mouth. And that one, honestly, from the research perspective, it's just a bear to work with, because you give people a couple samples and now everything has this same rough texture to it because you've wiped out a lot of the saliva that was present. So it makes it challenging for us to study, but certainly also then could have implications for the way that you eat a meal. So if you start out with, the really big red wine, but then you move into another type of wine that doesn't necessarily have as much of these particular types of polyphenols present, then you could completely change your experience of that particular beverage, and likely a lot of the foods as well. And on top of that, a lot of different flavors in foods will have different sort of stimulation effectiveness for saliva. So sour things generate a lot more saliva than all the other taste. Chewing generates more saliva than just swishing around and swallowing. And all of these different components then come into play when you talk about eating a full meal. But not a whole lot of detailed research on sort of the order effects of all these, other than people like me publishing stuff where we're frustrated, like, oh, we lost all the saliva and now it's hard to study because we wiped it all out.
You hear people, recommending that, well, if you're eating red meat or particularly done meat or something, it's this red wine or that red wine, and of course some of us who are a little more adventurous will even try something like a rosé or something. But I just an idea of what is really happening and why is it happening.
So physiologically, I don't know that there's an answer to why certain things seem to pair well with others. Psychologically, there's definitely an answer, and that's that you paid somebody a lot of money to tell you these things, and that does really work. That's not to say there's no science behind it too, but the psychology of this is really, your brain interprets the flavors that you experience and adds your, world view on top of it. And all of that is contributes to how people feel about their foods and the way they feel about a meal that they've consumed. I find that generally speaking, a lot of that aspect doesn't translate very well to most people. They drink what they like, and they like it because they've been drinking it for a long time, or eat what they like because they've been eating it for a long time. But at the same time, there are certain flavors that folks will avoid. That's part of, again, what we're interested in is the people who avoid flavors that, might come from things that are healthy for you, and can I help you stop avoiding those foods? But again, it is all part of this larger experience that people have as part of food and eating.
Yeah, you hear people recommending that this is this is good for you, and so forth. Well, from my view, if it tastes good, eat it.
To a certain extent. Again, I'm in a nutrition science department. I'm not a dietitian, but I work alongside dietitians. I train a lot of dietitians in foods and flavors, and that's part of the problem. A lot of the things that we want to eat aren't healthy for us, or we could replace them maybe with things that would be healthier for us. And that's like my daydream as the sensory scientist, as someone who's interested in flavor. I want people to be able to eat good food. That's why I got into this field in the first place, is because I love food and I want other people to love their food. But not everyone can do that and eat the diet that's recommended for the sake of their health.
We have a question in the back.
Yeah, we have an online question from Doug Dollimore from the ACS. Could this help explain why certain foods don't taste the same as we get older? And if so, how might that influence the dietary choices that older people make?
So absolutely, the short answer is yes. Especially as you age, you end up taking a lot more medications. Almost every medication on the planet has some sort of tagline that, this could dry you out a little bit, or you might not make as much saliva, or it might change the way you experience the taste of your food. Again, we hypothesize a lot of that is from loss of saliva and dryness, that then you can't dissolve things into the spit, so it can't actually touch the receptors on your tongue anymore because it can't get there. It's stuck away from the surfaces of the tongue. And so all of those components can then feed into the changes in behavior and in preferences and just sheer inability to eat sometimes. People who have dry mouth, who have xerostomia, typically have trouble experiencing the tastes and flavors of their foods. And again, that can tie back into some of these salivary questions that we have. Don't know right now how much of that might be due to specific proteins in the saliva, like we're researching, or how much of it is just sheer lack of solvent. You know, these are chemical and biological reactions. They need a solvent to exist in, and saliva is that solvent. So now you just threw a whole bunch of things together and they have no way to touch each other molecularly and interact. So loss of that can really change someone's ability to experience their food.
Okay. And I'm Katie Cottingham with ACS, and I had a question too. So have you identified the proteins and the other components in saliva that are responsible for this?
Some of them. A lot of that is standing on the shoulders of other folks, so work that has gone before us that has shown relationships between things such as proline-rich proteins in saliva, which there are like dozens of that particular family of proteins. So things like that can bind compounds such as the bitter or astringent molecules that you find in chocolate and tea and red wines and all those things I've been talking about. And we are seeing some modest changes in those. It's not very convincing yet, so we gotta go back and ask the question again, repeat the experiments, and see if we really find something, or if maybe we're wrong about some of these relationships. That's possible. But yeah, certainly, we've identified some of those. There are some mucins that seem to be changing in their expression in the saliva. And then there's a whole host of other things that I'm not necessarily certain are related to flavor. They are changing. We're getting statistically significant effects, but they might not be related to flavor exposure. They might be related to the fact that you're consuming a food. You know, so we do these studies, and for a week we don't have you eat a certain thing, and then for a week we have you eat a certain thing. Well, we've now changed what your diet is, and you know, if you believe that nutrition has any effect on your health, then it can change your biology, that means, so why shouldn't it change something in your saliva? So it's possible this is due to, you know, we fed people a boatload of milk, and that's changing, you know, the immunoglobulins present in their saliva. So we don't know what all of those are due to yet, but lots of things that are showing up as different, and lots more work to be done.
Great. Are there any other questions? I have one. Does your research have any implications for parents of children who are picky eaters?
Well, yes, but it's still going to be hard, to be honest. So if the story does turn out that if you convince yourself or your kid to eat something for longer, it will actually taste a little better in terms of its bitterness or other sort of bad flavors, you still have to eat it for a while for that to happen. And there's been work done before showing that, you know, working with little kids, like the number of exposures really matters, and you have to have a certain number of exposures before the kid will learn, okay, maybe this isn't so bad after all, but typically the parents give up after like 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole other side to that coin. It's possible we might be able to mimic some of these proteins that we're finding in saliva and then add them to the foods themselves. So there's all sorts of proteins present in the food supply that have similar structure and function to some of the proteins in the saliva. Maybe we could utilize that to change some of these flavors and like come up with a better way to serve your kids that really bitter food that they really don't want to eat, but is really good for them, and we would like them to eat more of it. So potential, but it's a hard road.
Yeah, I was surprised to see in your studies of human volunteers with almond milk, which was bitter, mm-hmm. They seemed to adapt pretty quickly within a week. Was that surprising mm-hmm. to you?
Well, so the big dilemma on that is we were adding something to their diet, and I was actually really concerned that if we didn't do it very carefully, we'd make people gain a bunch of weight. So I was trained by Dr. Richard Mattis, who does all sorts of work on solids and liquids and ingestions of calories and this stuff. And so I have like this innate, like built-in thing where if I feed people a bunch of beverages, they're probably going to gain weight if it has calories in it. And so we were trying to see, can we see this with just a modest exposure rather than something that I was afraid might actually have other consequences for the participants. Because, you know, we should take care of people in our studies. That's important.
All right, any other questions? Thank you very much, Dr. Running. The attached version of the session will soon be posted at bit.ly/ACS Live _Boston 2018. Please join us for our next press conference at 2:30 p.m. today on how water bottles and other recycled 3D printing materials could help avoid military supply snags. Thank you.
Thank you.